And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again on another news review. And I'm delighted to have Dan Wootton join us once again. Dan, thank you so much for your time.
So great to be back.
Great to have you. And I thoroughly enjoyed being on your show earlier, beginning of the week, because time flies past. You never know what you're on, but it was good. It was really good. Now we've got
you back on Outspoken.
Always good. And of course, you can find Dan Outspoken airs every weekday at 5 p.m. UK time, and that's 12 noon for Eastern or 9 a.m. Pacific time on the West Coast. And at Dan Wootton there is his Twitter X handle. Dan Wootton Outspoken is the Substack and also the YouTube. So make sure and make use of all of those. Before we go on, just to let our viewers know how you can support Hearts of Oak, thank you so much for your small donation, or £5, £10 a month, £15 a month. You can do that through DonorBox or Give, Send, Go. The links are there. And we really appreciate you supporting us that way, not only sharing the videos, but also your financial support. Now, let's jump on a very good friend of yours and a more recent friend, I think, of mine, that I've got to know much more recently, and that is Father Calvin Robinson. Now, this is, I'll show the video clip, but also wanted to show the news reporting that shows the despicable nature of all of our media. This is the Express. You might expect something different from the Express, but no, former GB News star sacked as priest after copying Elon Musk's Nazi salute. Calvin Robinson has been made redundant yet again after concluding the speech in the US by mimicking Elon Musk's major inauguration controversy. That is that. Now, I want to let me just show the video clip, and you can actually see for yourselves whether this awful thing that Calvin did, what your thoughts are. Here's a 45-second clip of Calvin at the end of a speech in DC at this pro-life event.
This I see as the last stand for the West. This is the last stand for Christendom. It's make or break time. The whole of the old world is crumbling. Every country in Europe is embracing death. America, as far as I could see, is the only country fighting for life. And that's down to you guys. So God bless all of you for what you're doing. Please keep doing it. I hope that I can encourage you. And my heart goes out to you. God bless.
So the big question is Calvin Robinson a Nazi? I think that seems to be the question in the media. How do you respond, Dan?
I mean, I couldn't believe it, actually, because Calvin is a regular guest on Outspoken. So we had just recorded the episode on Wednesday. He hadn't mentioned anything. The speech had happened, but it hadn't gone viral at that point. Within about an hour, it was international news. His church had effectively cancelled him. And it was clearly a joke. As Calvin has said post the incident, look, you can say that the joke was crass, absolutely fine, but is this response proportionate? Of course it's not proportionate in any way. This is cancel culture in action. Shame on the mainstream media. Shame on the ACC for doing this to a good man, a loyal man. And unfortunately, it shows that despite Trump's election, this idea that the US is going to be a total anti-woke beacon and is no longer going to engage in cancel culture is, I think, a bit for the birds. Because when you think about this, Calvin was actually making a bit of a political point there regarding the mainstream media reaction to Elon Musk's non-Nazi salute. So the whole thing is infuriating. Of course, for me, my concern is about Calvin as a friend. He's just moved to America. He's got the media surrounding him. He just got through the cancellation from GB News, which took place because he stood up for me when GB News treated me ridiculously. So I almost cannot believe it. And shame on the church. I know some discussions are happening behind the scenes, but this is just the ultimate example of ignore a social media mob. This would have just gone away. But then there are some people saying, well, clearly they were just looking for an excuse, and they didn't like the fact that Father Calvin was becoming a political figure in his own right.
Yeah, and I read the statement from the church, the Anglo-Catholic Church or whatever, and it's very strict because they say he made a Nazi salute. It didn't say something that could have been interpreted or anything. It was that, and then they go on to say that they have warned him against trolling and social media posts. And I mean, Calvin, one is he speaks truth in love all the time, so gently, and secondly, he understands the media. He's actually very good at it and very good at social media. And to think that he would be trolling, Calvin trolling, that doesn't really fit.
I know. I mean, and effectively, let's think about all of the members of the church who make political points on a regular basis. Now, what Calvin was talking about at that conference, of course, was pro-life, and the church have allowed it to be completely overshadowed by a joke. Now, Calvin is a performer, but so are a heck of a lot of our greatest religious leaders, because you have to have that performance. You have to have some type of connection with your congregation, and sometimes that is through humor. But look, let me tell you, Peter, I was sitting in the pews for Calvin's ordination, and I think it was about October or November 2023. Very
I was there as well, but I didn't know you then. But I remember being there.
Yes. And I'd gone through an incredibly hard time. So had Calvin. But the point being, that was one of the most important days of his life. He would probably say the most important day of his life. It wasn't a joke in any way. It wasn't political in any way. This is a guy whose absolute calling is to the church. And I just feel so disappointed for him, because obviously now, can he be part of any church? Is it really possible to be a political commentator on the right with traditional values and still operate within a religious sphere? It's going to be fascinating to see what happens. But of course, first and foremost, I just hope he's okay, because he's only very recently moved to the States. And now he's dealing with another big cancellation, which throws your life into turmoil.
Certainly. Well, I'll encourage the viewers and listeners certainly to pray for Calvin on the next steps, but also I really do think something will open up, because he is one of those people who land on his feet, who has principles, who speaks truth and does it so well. So it'll be kind of watch this space and see what happens next, but I'm certainly hopeful for him. Let's move on to immigration. Here's Priti Patel, former Home Secretary in the UK, explaining or trying to explain away or trying to agree with the ludicrous mass immigration policies of the last 14-year Tory government. Here she is.
But there's also been some downsides since.
Tell me.
Well, let's have a look at the graph. Net migration. Yeah. Look at that. That was on your watch. Where exactly on that graph were you the Home Secretary in charge of Britain?
So, well, we should first of all recognise that we ended free movement.
Yeah, you ended free movement for Europeans and you threw the borders open to the rest of the world, and the graph...
We always said that in Brexit, Harry.
No, come on. That is not fair. You did not say we're going to hit 1.2 million net migration.
No, we did not say that.
We're going to allow 1.2 million people into the country.
So let me finish.
In 1 year.
So let me finish. Brightest and the best come into our country. People on skilled work routes and visas.
Is that the brightest and the best?
We've always said, well, look at it's legal migration, Harry. It's legal. People who come here and work and contribute to our economy. Brightest and the best. Look at the points-based immigration system. For the first time ever, Harry, let me give you some facts.
Go on.
For the first time ever, we have a points-based immigration system, counting people in and out. You can turn off the immigration system at any stage in terms of what our economy needs and doesn't need.
I'll not continue because I can't go into it. It's only 2 minutes. But she seemed to have no issue with, if you've got huge amount of legal immigration, then that's fine. I think our concern is the numbers, and then you can look at what's illegal or legal. But when you're overwhelmed by that amount of people, and it's crazy, she didn't say, "Oops, we made a mistake. I'm sorry." I'm sorry is a difficult word for a politician, isn't it, Dan?
It is. And later in the interview, she even suggested that maybe the Conservatives should receive some type of apology, which was very bizarre. I find this one personally quite difficult because Priti Patel is a good woman, right? She is an honourable woman. She was certainly very supportive of me during my cancellation. So this is tough for me because that is one of the biggest political disasters in modern British history. It's why the Conservative Party, the most successful political party in history, right? No party comes close, really, to the Conservatives. And I just think it might render them extinct, because for the party to not acknowledge the fact that they got the mass immigration wave. By the way, she was talking about legal immigration being okay, but come on, illegal immigration, the invasion of the Channel started under Pretty's watch, and she has had so many opportunities to turn her back on that approach, including, by the way, when she ran for the Conservative Party leadership. Lots of people thought she was going to be a favorite. I thought she might be, but because of her intransigent position on mass immigration, she was the first out. So unfortunately, I agree with people like Matt Goodwin who watched that interview and say, I can never and will never vote for the Conservative Party again. They don't get it. They don't get the damage that they have brought to our country. They don't understand the demographic change. And I'm sorry, you can talk about short-termism when it comes to the economy, but you only have to look at the statistics to know the vast majority of the people coming in, and I really do mean the vast majority, actually are a drag on the state. They are the reason behind our housing crisis, behind our health crisis, behind our education crisis. So none of her argument makes sense. And there'd also be a lot of people saying, I'm sorry, we can't just throw open our borders anytime that there is a war in another country and say, come on in, 300 or 400,000 Ukrainians. That might sound harsh, Peter, but the reality is we are in trouble. This country is in deep trouble. It might be too late to turn this around, actually, if we are going to have another 4 years of this sort of mass immigration madness. Because, of course, the Labour government has committed to bringing down the number of migrants, but no top limit, no figures. I mean, what does that even mean when you're basically allowing 2 million into the country either legally or illegally a year? A reduction of that isn't good enough. I mean, I had Ben Habib on Outspoken earlier in the week, and he just said, stop it all now, all of it. Not net migration, which is what Reform UK are proposing, just for a period, turn off the tap. All migration has to end.
And I want to get on to Reform and Ben. I will come to that, but I want to jump over stateside, and we'll come straight back on UK politics and Reform. And it was this tweet by JD Vance. And this is obviously around him saying that as a Christian citizen, you look after your family, and then you could look after the stranger. And this has caused a whole furore. And it's an interesting discussion. And I think it's an important discussion, because who is your neighbor? Who do you care for? Who do you look after? So I think he is, whether he's right or wrong, and I'm kind of on the fence, but I think it's a great conversation to have. But it was this on Rory Stewart. JD Vance says, I've said before and I'll say it again, the problem with Rory and people like him is that he has an IQ of 110 and thinks he has an IQ of 130. This false arrogance drives so much elite failure over the last 40 years. I was like, wow, that is bang on the money. That actually I think more or less our class system, our kind of jobs for the boys, are those who expect him. You saw it with Cameron. He was there because he thought he had a right to be there. What were your thoughts when you saw JD coming back to the I have no love for Rory Stewart. I'd call him lots of things, but I'll refrain. What were your thoughts on his tweet to Rory?
My head was exploding in so many ways, because, look, firstly, you are completely right. This is basically the description of every centrist dad be it George Osborne, Ed Balls, Alistair Campbell, all of the cretins who have ruined our country, but genuinely don't get it because they live in their elite bubble. And actually the reality of what we're all having to face, what we're all having to deal with doesn't really impact them, which is why they lead in to this sort of woke ideology. But then I also thought, oh God, how frustrating, because this is what they live for. This is what the rest of politics lives for. You've got the vice president of the USA responding. Then I started thinking, but actually, this is maybe what needs to happen, because here we are in the independent media space. We know the mainstream media is dead. So maybe it is about time that our leaders start tackling the people who are in the independent space on the left, who are actually doing so much damage. Now, Rory Stewart has been completely discredited over a very long period of time, but probably the most recent example that I can think of, and that just still makes me laugh, is that he vowed to bet £100,000 on Kamala Harris winning the US presidential election. And then I watched some of that stream that night live where he's just sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, like, how did this happen? Because they don't get it. They are so out of touch with what ordinary British and American people are feeling. And when it comes to the argument that J.D. Vance was making in that interview, he was simply saying that, of course, the US president should care most about Americans, but he also went on to say the French president should care the most about the French people. The Italian prime minister should care the most about the Italians, and the British Prime Minister should care most about the English. The problem that we've got with our leaders at the moment, Peter, that really doesn't seem to be the case. We have a Prime Minister corrupted and captured who actually went on the record to say that he prefers Davos and the World Economic Forum lot than Westminster. That's so telling and so indicative. We have a foreign secretary who cares much, much more about the plight of people in African countries than he does the very real problems that Brits are facing at home. So I love the fact that we now have a presidential administration in the US calling out the elite class in such a provocative and viral manner. But then at the same time, I'm just like, oh God, Alistair Campbell's going to be getting off on this one. And sure enough, he's immediately accused the vice president of trolling Rory Stewart. Because of course, if you disagree with Alistair Stewart, I mean, Alistair Stewart is the most potty-mouth, vile bully in politics. But if you dare to disagree with him, then you are the troll.
It's independent media, a double-edged sword. I will actually end on changes in the White House press room and how they're inviting others in. We'll finish on that, but let me bring up back to reform, back to UK politics. Although it is more fun looking at US politics, I still think so, but we'll see how long that lasts. And it is this voting intentions. This was a polling company that put this out, not one of the major ones, but they had Reform UK in 27%, Labour 23%, Conservatives 21%. And this, I mean, I have big criticisms of Reform, and I know you talk about yourself as a critical friend, especially over throwing Tommy under the bus, not understanding Islam, not wanting remigration, all that. But yet, this poll is stunning in British politics. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are it's a trend. And while you can't trust individual poll companies, and as you say, this isn't necessarily one of the majors find out now, there is now a real trend. And look, I predicted this trend the moment that Nigel Farage announced that he was running in Clacton. I predicted he will be Prime Minister by 2029. I predicted that Reform would head to the top of the polls because I knew that Labour was going to destroy the United Kingdom. I knew that Starmer was an ideologue who was hiding what he really thought, that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was completely incompetent. So none of this is a surprise to me, but you're right, it's massive. And I guess because I predicted this, it can be easy to underestimate just what this means. I mean, the tectonic plates in British politics are shifting. What's also interesting to me in that poll is you look at the left, and you've got the Liberal Democrats, I think, on 11. You've got the Greens on 10. So all of a sudden, they become quite a major bloc as well. And what this says to me is that we're fed up with the uni party. We need the uni party to be smashed. And for the uni party to be smashed, I believe, yes, there has to be a revolution, but then there has to be genuine change. One thing that worries me about Reform UK, and yes, I am a critical friend. I absolutely think at the moment they are the best option by far. Doesn't mean I agree with them on everything. And I sometimes think that's what they want. They want slavish propagandists, and you're never going to get that from me. And I know you're certainly never going to get that from you either, Peter. But at the same time, I just think, okay, we've got to be careful that reform doesn't go back on a lot of their promises. So, for example, all of a sudden they're talking at the moment about how great first past the post is. And it's like, well, no. We need to smash the system. One of the reasons that you exist as a party is because you've always believed in proportional representation. Now, yes, that does align you with the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, but don't buy into this ideology that has been pushed by the Conservative Party for such a long time, Peter, that proportional representation is somehow a left-wing thing. It's absolutely not. It's a democratic thing. It means that just because I happen, unfortunately, to live in a part of London that is only ever going to vote for a Labour MP, my vote for Reform UK is not wasted. So I am a big believer in proportional representation. It sounds like a wonky topic. It's absolutely not, because this is how we bring true democracy back to the UK. This is how we keep the uni party honest, because remember, we don't have the same power as the MAGA movement or the Tea Party movement in the US, which was able to use the American primary process, which is very much focused on democracy, to actually allow Donald Trump to take over the Republicans. Now, by the way, that wasn't an easy thing for him to do either. I mean, look at the pushback that he had. But the point is, we just don't have the ability to do that, because the Conservative Party, in the end, will always be dominated by woke, wet, Liberal Democrat style MPs who fundamentally get to choose the two leaders that are put up to the British public. And we saw what they did to Boris Johnson. We saw what they did to Liz Truss. So fundamentally, there has to be a complete realignment of the system. It's going to be fascinating, though, because, of course, the next election will be run on first past the post. Weirdly, for Labour, it might end up being more of a fair fight for them if they did go for proportional representation. It won't happen. They don't have the balls to do that. But then you would have at least a Labour, Lib Dem, Green bloc fighting against a Conservative Reform UK. But the exciting thing about proportional representation is you could then see UKIP in the mix. You could then see a Tommy Robinson party in the mix. And all of those things would have the effect of dragging the Conservatives and Reform to where they need to be. But look, as I say, the tectonic plates are shifting. I watched an interview. I just watched it last night, actually, on YouTube, because I'm never going to tune into ITV Daytime anymore myself. But I saw Nigel Farage on This Morning, the show This Morning, really mainstream ITV show. And it was a softball interview. And I thought, wow, that is different. Something's changing here.
Do you, just still on topic, but do you think that Nigel actually is just angling to take over the Conservative Party, because he's a Tory boy? Obviously, he was UKIP, Brexit Party, so that was what he really believed in, freedom from the EU. But I kind of wonder whether he's just positioned himself slightly to the right of the Conservative Party to make him accepted, and then they say, Nige, we kind of need you back because no one else is doing a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll change the name of the party to Conservative Reform, for example. I could definitely see that, because they talk a good game when they're on social media. And Zia Youssef certainly has always said, no. He's the chairman of Reform UK. No. We're absolutely not going to merge. And they've attacked the Conservatives a lot. When Nigel was asked by Ben Shepherd, I think it was, the presenter on This Morning, about a potential merge with the Conservative Party, I know Nigel well. I can read when he's thinking, oh, maybe. And he didn't rule it out, to be honest. He didn't rule it out. So A lot of people still say, I mean, it was funny actually watching Ben Shepherd and Kat Deely just thinking it was so ludicrous, the concept that Nigel Farage could win the election under a Reform UK banner by himself. And it reminded me of all of those videos. I love these, actually. There's always good compilations put out by, you know, the big accounts on, the big right-wing accounts on X. But I love the compilations looking back to the American mainstream media and political class literally treating Donald Trump as a joke back in 2015, 2016, laughing at the concept that he could ever be president. This just isn't going to happen. Let's laugh along. And I really got a similar vibe. They just can't get their head around the prospect of Nigel Farage becoming prime minister. So personally, I like it when Nigel at the moment is very strong and completely rules out any type of merger or deal with the Conservatives. There is a long way to go. I don't think Kemi Badenoch will remain leader of the Conservative Party, for example, but it's not enough, is it, Peter? It's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic is not enough this time. A change of leadership is not enough. So I think Nigel has to be really, really careful in terms of how he positions himself alongside the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned Ben Habib. You had an interview with him. I was at an event with him last night. And this is something that he has just launched. This is the Great British Pack. I said, you ready to run with the pack? Join us at greatbritishpack.com. Join and let's save the country. And this is an interesting initiative, obviously based on the US model of political action committees, fundraisers. And people kind of clamor and talk about some of the smaller parties, and, you know, we need to build. Actually, unless you have funding, then actually can't really do much. But what were your thoughts? Because when I was there with Ben last night, he was referring to this. But it's an exciting development because even if you're 100% for reform, there needs to be other options, solutions, agitators, I think, on the right. So they don't just have it their own way. And maybe this is a way of keeping reform true to some of the promises they've made.
Yes, I totally agree. I'm a really big supporter of this Great British Pack, actually. I've been speaking about it for quite some time with Claire Bullivant, who is the woman behind it. Now, she was also behind the CDO, the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which I supported. That was all about trying to return democracy to the membership of the Conservative Party. Didn't happen in the end, but it really did show that there was still good, solid folk in the Conservative Party. And I spoke at their first conference in Bournemouth quite soon after the defenestration of Boris Johnson. So, big supporter of this. Ben Habib is going to be a brilliant chairman. I think the right word is agitator, because that's what he will be. He was very, very clear when I spoke to him. I'm sure he said the same thing last night, that he's not some sort of patsy for Reform UK or the Conservative Party. They intend to try and move the conversation about difficult issues. But actually what that will do is provide some political cover, hopefully, for Reform UK, for the Conservative Party to feel like it is easier to move to the right. Because what we need to do is shift the Overton window, which is exactly what Trump and Musk actually have done in the United States. And we're still not there. And look, do I think one organization can turn it all around? No, of course not. But this is, I speak to a lot of figures on the right who say we need to have some proper organization, especially given that the media is becoming much more fragmented. Look, we're in the independent space, and maybe there needs to be some groups who rally the troops at times, bring us together for common causes, but also actually allow someone like Ben Habib, who I actually saw on Sly News earlier this morning, and great, excellent that Sly News are having Ben Habib on, because they might find what he says very unpalatable. But again, it's important that we have people like that in the mainstream debate and that it's not simply confined to people within the Conservative Party and Reform UK, because the issue is they will always run away from tough conversations in fear of a gotcha moment. And I saw it happen earlier in the week, Peter, on the BBC. The British Bashing Corporation, as I call it, when a Labour MP challenged Zia Youssef about NHS reform. And he was very quick to say, oh, no, it's all going to remain free at the point of use. And, this is all just, a gotcha thing. It's like, actually, no, we need to have a proper debate, like Anne Widdecombe, who is a senior figure within Reform UK, has been advocating for some time. So don't just say right now, 4 years before an election, everything's going to remain free of the point of use, because that is a popular policy, because actually it's not necessarily a sustainable policy. It's a policy which is probably going to end up bankrupting the country. So I think that's where the Great British Pact could be really successful in terms of encouraging some of those policy debates. There's other organisations doing good things. I know Liz Truss is operating behind the scenes. You've also got the popular Conservatives. So we need some of this. It's like creating a Tea Party movement here in the UK.
No, 100%. Let's move on to the most famous political prisoner in the world. And this is why a lot of people have huge issues with Nigel, because he got into this fight he didn't need to get in. But it's this that Ezra has put up, as the letter Richard Inman got, who I saw last night from the prison, saying that he was not allowed. Your request to meet with Tommy has been denied because we believe you would use it for social media purposes. And Ezra Levant, Rebel News, put up, Tommy is in solitary confinement. That's meant as a short-term punishment for misconduct in prison, not as a long-term sentence. Denying Tommy the right to visit with his friends is simply because of their politics is illegal. They're mentally torturing him. And even Nigel is, between gritted teeth, said he shouldn't be in solitary confinement. But this, denying him access, they've already got him locked away. He can go to the gym, I think, for an hour or two. I know you've been to visit him, Dan, as have I. What were your thoughts here on the prison, even the legality of refusing to allow him to meet with friends?
Well, I feel some responsibility, actually, because after my visit, I did report the fact, and I believe this is in the public interest, the fact that Tommy had confirmed during his time in Belmarsh prison that Axel Rudikubana, the Southport killer, had been a practicing Muslim behind bars and in prison. I thought that was clearly in the public interest, and it feels like up until that point, the prison authorities have been turning a bit of a blind eye, because a lot of the people who were visiting Tommy were people like you who were his long-term friends, but who also might comment on what happened. So Paul Thorpe, Liam Tufts, Maya Tusi. And I guess because I was going in, yes, to privately meet him, check he was okay, but at the same time, I felt that this information was very much in the public interest. After that, it feels like they cracked down. So initially what they tried to do is they tried to get people to sign waivers, sort of confidentiality waivers, I guess, gagging orders. But now the crackdown has gone to another level where it's just, no, you're banned. And the problem is, of course, lots of Tommy's friends operate in a media space or social media space because that's how he became friends with them. And so I know for a fact that Liam Tufts has had his visit denied, and Liam is very much like, well, I'm not going to report on this. I'm going as a friend. But all of this, so I worry for Tommy, of course I do, because people are telling me he's in a very bad way. The thing that was getting him through was the visits. So I feel terrible. At the same time, I'm sure he would completely back me for the fact that it was very, very important that people knew and had confirmation that Axel Rudikubana was practicing as a Muslim behind bars in Belmarsh prison, given the cover-up that still goes on in regards to the Southport massacre. But of course, the bigger point in all of this is that this is all connected to what the political elites, what the establishment, what the government are trying to do. And it's ironically, given the name of Tommy's film, it is about silencing all of us. They are losing the battle. So what can they do? Always in the United Kingdom, under Keir Starmer, the government will always reach for censorship. They will always try to control. They will always try to shut people down, take away free speech. That is their main method of dealing with this stuff. Fundamentally, Peter, look, it's going to cause a lot of people a lot of pain, probably cause us a lot of pain over the next few years. In the end, though, that approach will not work. It will not work because look at how they tried to silence Donald Trump. I mean, literally every social media company, all of the people who are now at his feet, surrounding him, feeding him grapes, saying he's the greatest president to ever live, all of those people banned him permanently from the internet. Zuckerberg, Google, Twitter. So it didn't work because we now have ways to find out what we need to find out. But while they have the last vestiges of power, the last vestiges of the mainstream media controlling the narrative, the last vestiges of being able to censor people, being able to silence people, they're going to try, aren't they? Because that's what they know. I mean, look at the fact, I almost sometimes feel like I've been living in a parallel universe speech, but look at the fact that the conversation about the Southport massacre and the sentencing of Axel Rudy Kapana became a political debate about whether social media should be banned, about Elon Musk and the usual suspects having to take down more videos, and even about whether knives should be sold on Amazon. Our political debate is so dishonest because fundamentally they do not want to tackle the questions that really matter. And of course, in the case of Axel Rudy Kapana, it's should his family have been in the country in the first place? Why was this guy here when he had genocidal tendencies? And we're told that Rwanda is a safe country anyway. So there's all of that. And then secondly, why was he able to convert quite easily to extreme Islam? But they're not even prepared to admit he's a terrorist, Peter, let alone an extreme Islamist terrorist. So, yeah, there's a long way to go on this front.
There is, and of course, the big problem is Amazon. So if you see an Amazon truck anywhere, then maybe you need to ring 999
and let's blame the hapless Amazon driver. I mean, seriously, at some point, the Times newspaper was doing some investigation on the poor bloke driving the Amazon van who apparently allowed a neighbor to sign for the knife. I mean, come on, what we're going to blame him? We're going to blame him, the Amazon driver, for somehow the death of these young children at a Taylor Swift dance class. Oh, but this is always what happens. And this is why what we're doing is so important, because we will have the real conversations.
Yep, completely. There are four more stories. Let's just do 3 minutes on each, just to touch on them. And it goes on. That was London. With the date on it, I wasn't there. I didn't get invited to that on Sunday past. Westminster Bridge, obviously. It's not really what you'd expect if you come as a tourist to London, is it? It seems as though London is utterly changed. We've seen that from the immigration figures as well. But how is this type of thing allowed?
Yeah, I know. And also Westminster Bridge, of course, the scene of an Islamist terror attack. Yeah. So what about the families who lost their relatives as a result of that attack? And it's part of the cultural takeover, isn't it? And of course, multiculturalism has always told us that we should support others' cultures. And on the whole, that was always something I signed up for. But that is a very different thing going on there. That is about takeover, and it is about a threat, really, isn't it? A threat to our leaders. And perhaps they should feel threatened, given that we saw Labour MPs lose their seat to sectarian pro-Hamas supporters who are in the British Parliament advocating for first cousin marriage to be legal.
Yeah, it seemed as though we had a new constituency called Gaza in the election, which is really nothing to do with us, and that's a whole other. Immigration. We touched on it with Priti Patel, but this was a tweet. GB News had covered it. The Centre for Migration Control, and then said dependent migrants let in by the last government will cost the UK 35 billion by 2028. This year, over 4 million Brits will be paying income tax solely to cover the year. And GB News touted Boris' wave of migrant families because they're looking at 500,000 that he let in, and then that opens up to many other families. But see, every Conservative government seemed to be clueless, and now we're left with this huge problem, and yet Labour seem to talk about everything else, but the massive cost of letting waves of people into this country. And it's not as if we're awash with money. I thought we had a black hole, and yet we can happily pay out 35 billion. What are your thoughts on the rising cost of actually looking after people who we just let in?
Well, I mean, of course, it's absolutely shocking and terrible, and we know it's why this country is going to the dogs. I guess with all of these figures, Peter, I never believe them. I always think they're a gross underestimation because there are so many people here illegally. There are so many knock-on effects. So I'd probably take that figure and double it. And as I say, it will bankrupt us.
It really will. It really will. You mentioned Sly News, and I saw one of the old clips of Calvin being corrected. And they said, well, actually, we are Sky News, not Sly News. And Calvin just smiling. Those little things that he drops in, genius. But it's this about Sly News, and it's not going swimmingly well. Sky News giving up on linear TV, and I hadn't actually heard the term linear TV until last night. We're discussing it, but shifting its content online, I assume behind a paywall, going digital, because it seems as though they're out of money. And of course, GB News exists because they've got someone who's willing to put in 35 million a year, or take losses of 35 million a year. Obviously, the people behind Sky News are not prepared for that. What are your thoughts? Because years ago, you used to actually trust Sky News compared to the BBC, but now it all seems to be the same.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I used to appear on Sly News all the time, but that's when Sly News was owned by Rupert Murdoch. We were in a very different era. Of course, it's now owned by Comcast, or Concast, as Donald Trump calls it. They also own MSNBC in the US. And so there was a deliberate move to make Sly News a left-wing network. They ran programs like The Daily Climate Show, telling us that London was about to be underwater within a few years. So look, this is a seismic moment in the British media, because the end of Sly News, and that is what it is. I mean, look, it's going to be a slow, painful death, but that by saying we're in linear TV, what that means is that they're no longer going to be this 24-hour rolling news channel. They can't afford to do it. They're going to try and move to do things like this and expect people to pay a lot of money for it. And no one's going to do that. So I celebrate it now, and I never thought I would see the day where I would celebrate many journalists losing their jobs. But unfortunately, Sly News is no longer full of journalists. It's full of activists, and they've let us down on every major story of the past decade, be it Brexit, COVID, vaccines, Donald Trump. They've got it all wrong. So this is simply Sly adapting to what is happening in the market. Look, maybe there'll be a handful of diehards who are prepared to pay for a podcast hosted by Beth Rigby and Harriet Harman and Ruth Davidson, but that's going to be a small handful, right? Because the thing is as well, these people are so well served by the British Bashing Corporation, by the fake news agents, by all of the mainstream media, Rory Stewart and Alistair Stewart, who we were talking about earlier. Sorry, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, who we were talking about earlier. So yeah, it's the end. It's the beginning of the end. It's going to be a long, slow, painful death, and I'm there for it. And I'll be tracking it and following it all the way.
I think the only way anyone should watch Harriet Harman and Ruth Davidson is if you were paid to watch, and I don't know how much you'd have to pay you to watch. And I know you've touched on the Daily Mail as well with issues there, and people can go and kind of find your thoughts on that on your X. We don't have time, but it seems to be systematic of the legacy media. Which brings us on to the non-legacy media. Let's finish off here with the new press secretary in the White House talking about changes in the White House briefing room in that media center. Here she is.
And in keeping with this revolutionary media approach that President Trump deployed during the campaign, the Trump White House will speak to all media outlets and personalities, not just the legacy media who are seated in this room. Because according to recent polling from Gallup, Americans' trust in mass media has fallen to a record low. Millions of Americans, especially young people, have turned from traditional television outlets and newspapers to consume their news from podcasts, blogs, social media, and other independent outlets. It's essential to our team that we share President Trump's message everywhere and adapt this White House to the new media landscape in 2025. To do this, I'm excited to announce the following changes will be made to this historic James S. Brady briefing room, where Mr. Brady's legacy will endure. This White House believes strongly in the First Amendment, so it's why our team will work diligently to restore the press passes of the 440 journalists whose passes were wrongly revoked by the previous administration. We're also opening up this briefing room to new media voices who produce news-related content and whose outlet is not already represented by one of the seats in this room. We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. And you can apply now on our new website, whitehouse.gov/new media. Starting today, this seat in the front of the room, which is usually occupied by the press secretary's staff, will be called the new media seat. My team will review the applications and give credentials to new media applicants who meet our criteria and pass United States Secret Service requirements to enter the White House complex. So in light of these announcements, our first questions for today's briefing will go to these new media members whose outlets, despite being some of the most viewed news websites in the country, have not been given seats in this room.
And that was Caroline Leavitt, the new White House press secretary. She's 27. Oh my word. It's like, she's so good. But what are your thoughts? This changes everything and opens everything up. And Trump obviously learned a lot from Barron telling him to go on a lot of the podcasts. And so his eyes have been opened. But this is a big change and a complete move in terms of the White House accepting how people consume information and news.
It is. It's so important. It cannot be underestimated, the importance of that change, because the thing is, what do you see happen here in the UK? At the end of every press conference that Starmer gives, there is a list of mainstream media organizations who have already been told that they're going to ask a question. They know. They're working together. They're colluding, which is why, by the way, we saw no journalist ever ask Starmer, still to this day, what did you know about Axel Rudy Cabana and when? Just lay it out exactly. So that means the mainstream media, even though for all of the reasons we've discussed, are losing power, losing audience, people no longer trust them, they still have this really sick ability to set the agenda. Because Beth Rigby, no one's listening to a podcast, but she gets that question, doesn't she? So she can try and drive the debate in a particular ideological direction. So, yeah, I mean, I obviously was just sitting there celebrating that and thinking every government around the world should follow suit. But this is where we are heading. A revolution in the media is coming because we, the people, have had enough of the mainstream and they've failed us time and again. So, yeah, I thought this was great. Obviously, it's just a start. I mean, Steve Bannon had said, you know, have the whole front row, should all be the independents. I'd like to see them go further. But at the same time, you've got to start somewhere, right? And this was a great start.
Yeah, the whole front row with Natalie Winters in the front row, so Dan Bongino's he'd applied, and to have figures like that would be
amazing.
And to have Tucker there at the front row. I mean, there's so many huge figures, and it is exciting to see how this develops. And I'm really interested to see how Caroline Levitt actually performs there, because she is very assured, she's very steady, confident, and yeah, it's going to be exciting.
She's amazing. I mean, absolutely incredible. A star is born, as they say
100%.
after that briefing.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. Always good to have you on, for touching everything that's happening in the week's always a busy week. I wanted just to show what one meme I came across, and there was one I wanted to show, and I actually held back. I thought, I don't know if I want to. Here's one that I did think was funny.
What are you going to show?
Well, for a US audience, Kamali's probably thinking about other women and her Doug. Why did you want me to sleep with Trump? And here is her tweet, November the 3rd. I already told my husband on January the 20th, 2025, he will sleep with the next president of the United States. So you can imagine poor Doug is quite confused at what his wife wants. It made me smile. So I thought we would end off with something cheerful, as the news is often dark and concerning and confusing. So, but Dan, thank you so much again for your time.
So great to be here. Speak soon.